All right, in this video, I'm going to show you the DIY method if you want to upgrade your ferrules. Let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a wonderful day. So this video, I'm going to be giving you the step-by-step method. If you are interested in changing out your plain, traditional, uninspiring black ferrules to something a little bit more exciting, a little bit more personalized, a little more unique. I'm going to show you the entire process. I'm going to stick to using tools that I think you probably either already have at your house or would be very easy and inexpensive to get your hands on. I'm gonna not bother using, the belt sanders and the turning belts and any of that stuff. So we're gonna keep it all pretty simple and straightforward. Now, before we get started, I've got two quick disclaimers. Number one, what I'm gonna be showing you today is going to be the process that you wanna use if you've got steel shafted clubs. Now the club I've got here, this shaft, yes, is black in color, but this is in fact a steel shaft. It is just a paint job. So this is steel, it is not graphite. If you have graphite shafted irons and you are wanting to do a ferrule swap, it is going to be a little bit more involved process. You definitely are going to have some extra tools that you probably need and some extra precautions you need to take in order to not damage that graphite shaft. Number two, the other part of this is, and I'm going to leave a list down in the description below with the brands that I think are going to be easier to work with and harder to work with when it comes to doing this sort of ferrule upgrade job. Because depending on the irons that you've got, certain brands are going to be very straightforward and certain ones are probably going to be best left for someone like me or someone who at least has experience reshafting working with golf clubs because they can throw you a few more curveballs. All right, so let's get this head removed from the shaft so we can take this ferrule off. I'm going to be using just a little mini torch here. You could also use a heat gun. That will also work. This is going to be a little faster. You just have to make sure you're paying attention. Of course, when we're doing something like this, safety glasses, always a smart idea, and a glove because things can get hot and you don't want to burn yourself. Now, because we're working with a steel shaft here, all we really have to do is heat up this head until the old epoxy breaks down, and then we can twist the two apart. We don't need any special tools for this. We just want to move it back and forth. We don't want to keep the flame in one place. Just make sure we keep it moving so we don't inadvertently damage the finish. The shaft is really only going to slide about, call it 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches into the head, so that's really where we want to focus the heat. We don't need to move it down here. We want to keep it right up here at the top. After we've been doing this for say 15, 20 seconds, something like that, we can now grab it with our gloved hand, twist it with the other hand on the grip side, and just start rotating it, twisting it until it pops out just like that. All right, at this point, we now have some residue that is down there inside the hosel. Couple different ways you can get it out, but the easiest way is to just get a little sort of wire brush that looks like this, just a thin wire brush, and we can just kind of slide that around in there and get out any of that old epoxy. Now it's basically all cleaned out right in there. I will also tell you, sometimes when you do this and you take clubs apart, there may have been a weight in the tip of the shaft. And sometimes the tip weight will stay with the shaft when you pull the club apart. However, other times the tip weight will get stuck in the head versus the shaft. If it gets stuck in the head, it's going to be a little bit more of a process to get it out because you're going to need to sort of pull that out so you can get the shaft back in. You may need to drill it out with a, call it a 1/4 inch drill bit, something like that. But in this case, and hopefully in most cases, either the tip weight will remain up here in the end of the shaft, it'll just look like a little piece of a little metal plug on the end, or there won't be one in the first place like this club, and so you won't have to worry about it. Okay, now that we've done that, we can now remove this ferrule off of the shaft and clean up the end of the shaft here. So again, we can take our heat gun, take our torch, and just real quick, just soften up the plastic of the ferrule, just like that. Don't do it too long. Be careful, because sometimes these ferrules can actually catch on fire, which is always a bit concerning when it happens. So just be aware of that. And what we're going to do now is just use a utility knife and cut through it a little bit and then just slide it off. Again, always utility knife away from you, not towards you. And now we can see we've got the old ferrule off and we've got the shaft removed. Now at this point you can use a utility knife and just kind of scrape off the majority of the old leftover epoxy that's there. Right now there's epoxy all inside the tip of this shaft, which completely seals up the end of it. What that means is if we try to reattach this head with new epoxy, we are going to have a buildup of pressure, and what ends up happening is the shaft will not want to go all the way in, and even if you think it's all the way in, it'll start to work its way back out because there's nowhere for that pressure to escape. So what we need to do at this point is create a little vent, a little way for pressure to be released down out the back end of the shaft. What I've got right here is just a 1/8 inch drill bit. Doesn't have to be 1/8 per se, it can be slightly smaller, slightly bigger, but we just need something to just give us a little hole, a little vent opening down through this little bit of epoxy here. You can see now we have a very small hole that goes all the way through where the epoxy was and gives us room for the new epoxy and any air pressure to move out down the shaft so that everything stays together and the shaft doesn't ride up. Got my vise here, got just a little shaft clamp here to keep the shaft from getting damaged by the vise jaws, and we're just now going to clean up the rest of the tip of this shaft. All we're going to use for this is just a very small strip of medium grit sandpaper, around, call it 100, 120 grit sandpaper, that I just cut into a little narrow strip like this. And all we're going to do is just use what I call the shoe shine method, where we go back and forth like that. And then we're going to rotate the shaft a little bit, 90 degrees. Do the same thing again. Rotate again. One more time. Just like that. As you can see, we now have the shaft tip nice and clean, slightly roughed up so the new epoxy will have something to bond to, and it'll just make everything go much smoother. As far as how much you want to actually rough up, how far down you want to go, ideally what you want to do is, and obviously since you've pulled the shaft out in the first place, you can kind of look where the old marks were, but in some cases it may be hard to see. So all we want to do is, if we insert the shaft back into the head at this point, we want to make sure there's at least, call it, 1/4 to say 3/8 of an inch of prepped area, of roughed up area extending past where the end of the hosel is. That's going to give us a better hold for the ferrule to attach to the shaft as well, so we don't get any slipping of the ferrule. Again, you can very easily use the same wire brush that we used inside the head, and we can just kind of run it inside the ferrule a little bit, just kind of give the surface just a little roughing up to make the epoxy bond a little bit better. So we're just going to go just like that, and that should be good right there. Okay, this is also a good time to point out that the shaft and the head come in different diameters. So you want to make sure that you know what diameter you're working with, because it's going to impact either the kind of ferrule or how easy it is to get that ferrule on. Because even though this is a .355 shaft, this is a .355 head, And this ferrule is ideally designed for a 0.355 shaft as well. If I just try to slide this over, it does not want to go down very far by itself. So be aware of that, especially if you're dealing with the other primary size of shaft, which is 0.370. If you have that shaft, this ferrule is really going to give you some trouble right off the bat. So if that's the case, you're definitely going to want to sand out the inside of this ferrule, or even use a drill and drill out the inside of this ferrule so that it'll fit a little easier over the tip of this shaft. Okay, last thing to do before we start epoxying and installing the new ferrule, I want to get just a little tiny bit of acetone. You could also use denatured alcohol. And we're just going to take a Q-tip dipped in there and just clean out the inside of the hosel, just to remove any last bits of whatever that could possibly interfere with the bonding process of the new epoxy. And I just like to go ahead and do the same thing with the end of the shaft. Just clean that up too. It's not going to hurt anything and can only help improve the bonding strength of the final product. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and I'm going to show you how to epoxy these back together. Thoroughly, because we don't want to have a failure, which is always every... Let's take first our head, and what we're going to do is just scoop a little bit of epoxy on the end of the popsicle stick, just like that. We're just going to drop that down inside the hosel, and then we're just going to rock it around in there and make sure we just coat all the surfaces on the inside of the hosel, just like that. Next step, what we want to do is take our stick, our popsicle stick, and just make a little line of epoxy that I run all the way around it, just like that. That's going to help make sure that that ferrule doesn't go sliding around once it's on there. Let's take our ferrule out of our hot box here. We're going to go ahead and start it onto here, and I can already tell you it slides on much easier now that it's warm. And now we're going to use our little wood block and just push this down, and as you can see, it slid on about an inch. Now it's still going to go a little further once we install it onto the head, but that gives us a good starting point and gives us somewhere where we can now put a little epoxy on the tip of the shaft. Again, you don't have to overdo it, but you want to make sure you coat all the surfaces. At this point, we're just going to slide these together. We're going to tilt it up like that, and we can kind of push down a little bit on the shaft. Keep rotating the shaft as we go. At this point, we're going to tap it down a couple times on the ground to get that ferrule set. Just like that. We'll bring it back up. We're going to give it a few more spins. We're going to get a little paper towel, and we're going to wipe off the excess epoxy. Last thing I like to do here is if you have a little bit of mineral spirits or grip solvent, put that on a little bit of a towel like this, and this will help get any last bits of epoxy residue that maybe didn't wipe off with a dry towel. Make sure that your shaft is aligned the way that you want it. So if you've got any sort of logos on that shaft, you want to make sure that they are pointed in the right direction, because if not, they're going to be stuck there and you're going to be looking at them. So go ahead and get those lined up. One more wipe, and now into the hot box. And we're going to let this sit again, because this is the quick set epoxy. This is really only going to have to probably sit in here for about 10 minutes, and this club will be ready to finish off. All right, here's the club. It's been about 30 minutes, about 20 minutes in the heater, and then an additional 10 minutes to come back to room temperature. Actually, with this hosel and this ferrule, the fit is actually pretty darn good right from the get-go. It's a pretty smooth transition there. Some hosels are going to be much thicker, some hosels are going to be much thinner. Obviously, the thinner ones are then going to make this ferrule stick out more, and it's going to look a little funny. So that's where we really want to make sure we sort of shave it down and get it all lined up and smooth. So I'm going to show you that right now, what we want to do, regardless of whether it just has a little bit of a lip like this or a more substantial size difference between the ferrule and the hosel. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to put my little shaft clamp right up against the end of the ferrule like this, and then I'm going to put the whole thing right up against the edge of my vise just like that. And just kind of tighten it up a little bit. Now all we're going to do here is sort of using the same process we used before with the sandpaper. I've got two different grades of sandpaper. First, I've got a rougher 120 grit sandpaper, and then I've got a much smoother, call it 220 to 250 grit sandpaper. So we're going to use this sandpaper to just kind of move as much material as we need to in order to get a nice, smooth, flush edge here. And then we're going to switch over to the fine sandpaper and just polish it up a little bit. And then we'll have one more step and this club will be done. So we're just going to kind of go back and forth gently, just like that. Then we're going to give it a little 90-degree turn. Same thing again. Another 90-degree turn. Now this is a chrome finished hosel, so we don't have to worry about the sandpaper doing any damage. If you had a painted hosel or some sort of finish other than chrome that you were concerned about, well, then you might want to put some masking tape down, or just be very careful when you're sanding and just make sure you're only sanding the ferrule and not sanding the hosel at all. Again, if it's chrome like this, you can kind of be a little looser with it. It won't really make any difference. Let's do one more side. Just like that. Now when I run my fingers over it, it's nice and smooth. So at this point, if it didn't feel smooth, we'd go back, do the whole process again with the medium grit. This feels pretty good, so we're going to switch over to the fine grit. Again, just that back and forth, rotate, back and forth, rotate. And at this point, it's all nice, smooth, and even. Now the last thing to do is we just need to go and bring back the shine a little bit because the sanding has kind of dulled down the finish of the ferrule. So let me show you real quick what we do there. Now I like to use a rubber glove at this point because we're going to be using a little bit of acetone. And we're just going to put the acetone on a paper towel or a lint-free cloth. Just kind of get it damp. And then once we do that, we're just going to gently wipe the ferrule in the opposite direction of how we sanded it. So we were sanding it this way, back and forth, so we're going to wipe it this way. And that should smooth everything out and give us a nice, clean, polished finish on that ferrule. So we're just going to take it like this and just kind of wipe, 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 and rotate, and wipe and rotate all the way around, just like that, until we get a nice shine back on the ferrule. There you go, start to finish. It is not that difficult to change out the ferrules on a set of iron. Again, remember, if you are thinking about doing this, check down below in the description. I'm going to give you that list of what clubs I think are easier to deal with and which ones are definitely going to throw you a couple of curveballs. Also remember, if we're dealing with graphite, you don't want to just take this shaft and start twisting it when you're trying to remove it. You're really going to want a shaft puller to pull that graphite shaft out nice and straight and salvage it. Otherwise, if you start twisting it, if you start bending it, you're going to ruin the graphite and then you're going to have to buy a new shaft. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go down below, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos. If you're interested in a fitting, in a custom build, in a repair, if you saw all this and said, yeah, I'd like new ferrules, but I don't know that I want to do that, all my contact information is down below and you can get in touch with me that way. And I will see you on the next video. Bye.